The 2026 NBA All-Star Game was a rousing success. It featured a new format on a new network, and it killed. It got almost 9 million viewers, nearly twice as many who had watched the previous year's All-Star Game, and was overwhelmingly praised for its competitiveness. And while many people attributed this game's success to either its new format that had been implemented, or the fact that Victor Wembanyama had made a concerted effort to make everyone play harder, it should not be overlooked that one of the reasons the 2026 All-Star Game did so much better than the 2025 All-Star Game is that the 2025 NBA All-Star Game had to have been one of the single worst produced major sports broadcasts in history. The 2025 NBA All-Star Game was produced so terribly that even if the basketball had been amazing in it, and even if its format had been perfect, it still would have been a disaster because of how horrible a job TNT and the NBA did at trying to produce 3 hours of entertainment. So, here's the backstory for this game. Almost from the very beginning of the NBA's existence, the league had held an All-Star Game every year, and it was always a marquee event on the NBA calendar. But by the time the 2010s had rolled around, people started to notice that the players weren't taking it very seriously anymore. The game had never been known for defense, but it had gotten to the point that the players weren't even seeming to try now, which led the NBA to change the format for the game in the hope of making it more interesting. But none of the new ideas stuck. So in the 2024 game, they went back to the old East versus West format, and the final score for that game was 211 to 186. The product was going the wrong way. And so, for the 2025 All-Star Game, the NBA decided to turn the game into a tournament comprised of 3 short games between 4 teams. 3 teams of All-Stars, and then a 4th team comprised of rookies and sophomores that had won a similar tournament 2 nights earlier between rookies and sophomores, in which those teams had been selected by former NBA players. And then the 3 All-Star teams were selected by Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, and Kenny Smith, who were the stars of Inside the NBA, and were, of course, also former NBA players. And speaking of Inside the NBA, which was TNT's flagship NBA show, the other thing to know about this game is that this was the final NBA All-Star Game that TNT was ever slated to air, because this was their last season of having NBA game rights, which had just been bought by Amazon. And in an attempt to spice up the game, TNT's Big 3 analysts on Inside the NBA had not only selected the rosters for this game, the rosters were named after them too. It was no longer East versus West or Team LeBron versus Team Giannis or anything like that. It was Team Shaq versus Team Kenny versus Team Chuck versus Team Candace Parker, who was in charge of the rookie-sophomore team that had won the rookie-sophomore game. There was also a tournament. And if all of that was hard to keep track of, don't worry, you were not alone in thinking that. Alright, so let's go over this broadcast. I managed to find a replay of this game that included TNT's coverage right before the game tipped off, and I'm glad I did because it's rather amazing to go over. So, in the lead up to this game, TNT had put together a pregame show, and in the last half hour of this pregame show that I saw before they cut to the game, TNT's pregame show did not discuss the All-Star Game at all. They didn't preview it, they didn't talk about it, they basically ignored it. Instead, there was a tribute segment to the Inside the NBA guys, and then they talked about recent NBA news, and then there was a segment in which they previewed the new Superman movie, and then they cut to the game. TNT's studio panel for the All-Star Game literally discussed Superman in the lead up to the game more than they discussed the actual All-Star Game that they were about to air.
So you're saying Dwight Howard not the real Superman?
No, I'm saying Christopher Reeves is the real Superman, actually.
So then, TNT cuts to the arena in San Francisco, where the game was being played. And we see the player introductions for the game. And there were two interesting things about the player introductions. For one thing, there was a musical performance throughout the entire thing, which made these introductions very long. For another, they actually had Chuck, Shaq, and Kenny come out to be introduced not only along with the players that they drafted, on the same stage that the players came out on, they had them come out before the players as the primary headliners of these teams.
The 1993 NBA MVP, he was named to the NBA's 75th anniversary team, the GM TNT's Charles Barkley!
Which is wild because it's not like they were coaching these teams. All they'd done is pick which guys they wanted that were available to them in a draft that had taken about 20 minutes. But anyway, the introductions wrap up. And so you think, hooray, the game is going to start. Well, no, because as Ernie Johnson is setting the stage for the game, the broadcast unveils its first major wrinkle.
Elimination tournament.
Wait a minute, hold on, Arnie. Hold on. Time to get the people what they want. DJ, hit it.
He's one of the game's enduring legends.
Yes, out of nowhere, Kevin Hart, the comedian, in case you're watching this in the year 3000 or something and you don't know who he is, comes out to a player introduction and he announces to the crowd that this won't be a regular NBA All-Star game. This will be an NBA All-Star game in which his thumbprint will be all over it.
Now, I don't know if I told you this or not, Ernie, but I got a button. Paid for this button with my own damn money. And when I hit this button, we go into Cold Kevin, okay? Cold Kevin means that everybody needs to stand back and get ready for an injection of 100% no holds barred Kevin Hart brand energy.
That is certainly a twist.
Yeah.
So, this was about the point when the NBA fans who were watching this started to groan, because whether you liked Kevin Hart or not, the idea that he was going to be featured all throughout the game as like its official comic relief character was something most people found bizarre. Because why would anyone want the NBA All-Star Game to have a comic relief character to it? It seemed incredibly forced, but whatever. So they go to commercial. TNT then displays the starting lineups for the game, and you think, alright, cool, it's about to begin. But no, because first, there's another sequence involving Kevin Hart, in which he speaks with Chuck and Kenny before their teams play.
I couldn't hear what Charles said over the sweat on his lip.
In a 2-minute back and forth in which Chuck and Kenny both speak more than either of the players that they were representing. But okay, the game finally starts at this point. And if you were watching at home, you're now in appraisal mode. You're now trying to get accustomed to this new format and see if it works or not. But the action is awkward right off the bat because Shaq had rotated into the announcer's booth, and Shaq immediately starts downplaying how good some of the international players that were in the game actually were.
Who are the top 5 players in the league right now?
Listen.
I just wanted you, I'm asking you a serious question.
Steph Curry, KD.
Top 5?
Yeah.
And you got to put Jokic in there. Come on now. And SGA. You got to put SGA in there.
You're not putting Logan in there? You're not putting SGA in there?
Listen, Candace's statement was correct. They are catching up.
Okay.
So, this was Shaq not wanting to acknowledge that Nikola Jokic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the current and next MVPs of the league, were even top 5 players in the league. A wild statement, let alone during the All-Star game, while Jokic and SGA were both on the floor. You know, when you'd normally expect the announcers to be talking up the players when they were playing. But anyway, the game reaches its first break. It goes to commercial, they come out of commercial, and all of a sudden, the broadcast reveals that Kevin Hart, Chuck, and Kenny are now going to talk over the game while the game is going, and that what they're saying is going to be piped over the PA system so that the players themselves can hear them.
Early thoughts, Kevin, on what we've seen.
I'm seeing way too many big men shoot the three. I'm telling Chuck, be a real coach.
To say this was awkward would be the understatement of the century, and you can practically feel the crowd cringing as it sets in that this is happening.
If another 7-footer or above shoots another three-pointer, sit him down. Sit him down, Chuck. I don't want to see another big man shoot a three. Sit him down. Point blank. Get in the box. I want to see him bang.
It's unbelievable that TNT thought this was a good idea. For 2 painful minutes, Kevin Hart not only talked over the action, he openly bashed what he was seeing to the players as they were playing during the All-Star game.
Get in the box. Why are you up there, Chuck? look at this. Look, Chuck. Chuck, sit his ass down. Right now, Chuck. Sit him down.
Maybe TNT thought that adding more of a roast personality to the game would make the game funny or invigorate the players somehow. But what it really did was make the game extremely uncomfortable, because now the broadcast was openly talking shit about the game and saying that what was happening in it was bad, which, if you're a casual viewer, is not exactly making you feel great about what you're watching. And to say that this went over poorly in the crowd would also be an enormous understatement, because again, you could just feel everyone wincing from having to be subjected to this bad comedy bit during the sporting event that they just wanted to watch. So the game eventually continues without Kevin Hart speaking over it. But this was such a brutal segment that it was hard to enjoy the action anymore. Like, the broadcast had just interjected to tell you, the viewer, that some of what was happening during this game was of poor quality. It's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do when you're trying to get people to like your product. You're supposed to be selling the product to people. And this was not that. And the irony is that the quality of the game had actually been really high relative to previous All-Star games. The action was good. Victor Wembanyama was making good plays. Jalen Williams was making good plays. The game itself wasn't boring at all. And if you happened to be watching the game on mute, you might have really enjoyed what was going on. But the broadcast wasn't going to let that happen. And so, once again, the All-Star game goes to commercial, and when it comes back, once again, the All-Star game becomes the Kevin Hart show.
SGA, get the ball, do work, clear it out, do what you do. You wore the mustard colored sneakers. Make the mustard colors work. You got on the mustards, make them work. Come on, man. Play ball. God. Sorry, Ernie. Sorry.
Quite all right.
It's wild, right? The broadcasters of this game were being so annoying that SGA, the soon-to-be MVP, was looking at Kevin Hart and clearly telling him to shut the fuck up while motioning like, can we move this along already? Can we just play basketball, for crying out loud? And if you're a viewer, now is when it starts to set in that this is going to keep happening throughout this game. Now you start thinking, oh God, am I going to have to endure these bits every 10 minutes or so? Alright, so the first game wraps up. Team Chuck defeats Team Kenny, for what it's worth. And even though the score wasn't insanely close, there was objectively good play in it for an All-Star game. And if you were watching this game live, you were given no time whatsoever to appreciate this, because when the telecast comes back from commercial, what are we greeted with? We are greeted with a MrBeast challenge segment out of nowhere, in which MrBeast has a fan compete in a shooting contest with Damian Lillard.
Behind me is $100,000, and we're going to grab someone random from the stands to compete against Damian Lillard for this $100,000.
And this goes on for 6 minutes. And here's the thing. Whether you like MrBeast or not, having a MrBeast challenge completely interrupt the NBA All-Star Game for 6 minutes is a horrible idea, because if you're watching the NBA All-Star Game, you're watching it because you want to watch the NBA All-Stars. If you wanted to watch MrBeast, you could just watch MrBeast. No one on earth was looking for a mutated All-Star Game hybrid that was both a basketball game and a MrBeast video, any more than they would look for literally anything to be randomly interrupted like this. And sure enough, NBA fans despised this segment because it was the NBA saying to them, we don't think our product that you like is sufficient. So we're now going to offer something else in its place. And that something is a non sequitur YouTuber. And this segment could have been amazing. It could have been executed perfectly. It would not have mattered because the mere existence of this segment was the NBA All-Star Game putting itself down and diminishing its own stature. It was the NBA saying, this is no longer a basketball game, this is something else. And the moment they crossed that threshold, no level of basketball play was going to salvage the 2025 All-Star Game to actual NBA fans. So, this broadcast is now in a very bad place. The game has been on for over an hour at this point, and there's been about 10 minutes of actual basketball played, with all this fluff around it. But the one saving grace, again, is that the play itself wasn't bad. From a basketball standpoint, this had been an indisputable step up in terms of quality from the previous All-Star Game. Like, if you compare the highlights from the 2024 game to the highlights from the 2025 game, you can see a big improvement. And this broadcast not only didn't promote that improvement, it then did the exact opposite. Because after that MrBeast segment, the game cuts to TNT's All-Star Game panel, and Draymond Green, who TNT had elevated to be an analyst for this game, uses his entire speaking time to rant about how terrible he thinks this new format is.
Come on, what are we doing? This is ridiculous.
In a segment that closes with him saying this.
Scale of 1 to 10, your thoughts of the format?
10 being the best.
Yes.
A 0. Sucks. Same basketball.
So, for many years, one of the biggest complaints about TNT's NBA coverage was about how incredibly negative it could be at times. In fact, there had been points during the 2025 season in which both Chuck and Shaq had publicly ripped the NBA. But even by those standards, what Draymond did here was basically the single worst thing you can do, not only during a sports broadcast, but any broadcast, which is to tell viewers that what they're watching is trash. The basis of entertainment is that you want the people consuming your product to, like it and enjoy it and think it's good. No one wants to hear that the thing they're consuming is a 0 out of 10 and sucks. It's a slap in the face to the audience. It makes you not want to keep watching it anymore. Because if the product itself is telling you that it's bad, why should you enjoy it? And between the MrBeast segment, the Kevin Hart segments, and now this, the message the NBA was sending to its own fans during this All-Star game was, we suck, you should not like this.
Kyrie Irving. They get to see Kyrie and Steph. Ooh-wee. Coming up next.
Only up to 40.
Awful.
Draymond's commentary spoiled whatever minute chance there was that people were going to come away with a positive experience from the All-Star game. His comments were so bad that they actually had to address them on air during the next game, which was between Team Shaq and Team Candace.
I'm going to disagree with Draymond a lot. You know, it's, listen, we're trying anything. You know, I use the analogy like when your kids mess up the house, you make them clean it up and they complain, and they mess the game up.
And so you'd think that that would be the end of this. But no, Draymond, like a wrestling heel, dug in further and spent the rest of the broadcast, whenever he was on screen, annihilating the All-Star game.
Those games weren't exciting at all. I didn't see you even smile during that.
Don't put me on.
It wasn't exciting at all.
That was unnecessary. Jeez. And then we got to the championship, Draymond.
And I took a picture of y'all watching this game, by the way. Y'all look so uninterested.
Y'all.
And again, what was so unfair about all of this is that the basketball itself not only wasn't bad, but was a marked improvement over the previous year's game. What Draymond did was a completely unreasonable disservice to the people actually playing in this game. And plus, even if the game was terrible, the All-Star game is just supposed to be a fun exhibition. If you were watching this, you weren't looking for much. You were watching it because you just wanted to see fun basketball. No one was looking for amazing play out of the All-Star game. They just wanted it to be pleasant. And yet TNT had managed to put multiple people on screen throughout the telecast who were telling its viewers that this game sucked. So, the 2025 All-Star game was already doomed by this point, and it settles into a pattern. Before the start of the next game, there was another segment with Kevin Hart, and another commercial break, and once again, there was another Kevin Hart segment with his and Shaq's voices carrying throughout the stadium again.
Much needed three-pointer. Oh.
Watch this three, though, from Steph Curry.
And again, you can tell that all the players and all the fans in the crowd were just like, can we just get this out of the way, please? So, the second game wraps up. There's then a musical segment that lasts about 6 minutes, and then another uncomfortable panel segment with Draymond Green, and then we move to the start of the third and final game within the NBA All-Star Game, which naturally begins with a 2.5 minute long Kevin Hart intro segment. And then there's basketball. And it's the worst basketball stint of the entire night because Team Chuck couldn't buy a bucket in it. And the game goes to break with the score at 11-1. Now, at this point, it is worth keeping in mind that there had been about 6 minutes of basketball played within the last half hour, thanks to all these various stoppages. So, this game has no momentum whatsoever. It is crawling to the finish line. And you would think that at least by now, you're only going to get basketball the rest of the way, right? I mean, this is the end of the game we're talking about. This is the triumphant conclusion, the last dash. Well, you would be wrong, because after the commercial break, the game gets paused again, and instead what fills the screen is a video tribute to the Inside the NBA guys, followed by Kevin Hart gathering them all around to toast them and give them gifts and banter with them.
When players lose, you always want to send them fishing. So you know what I did? I said, let's get the boats.
And this goes on for 7 interminable minutes. And when you factor the added commercial break that followed this and the extra padding around all this, this tribute segment stops the game for 10 minutes. 10 minutes!
But I only have one question. Were you not entertained?
Yes. There are like a dozen reasons why this was absolutely ridiculous. For one thing, having the people calling the game stop the game to celebrate themselves is a level of navel-gazing that is just intolerable. For another, it's not like these people were retiring. All the Inside the NBA guys were doing was moving from TNT to ESPN. That's it. It's not like they were dying or something. It's not like they were about to be executed by firing squad after the game or something. So for them to get a tribute during the All-Star game in the first place was wholly unnecessary. Never mind for it to take up 10 minutes. But the biggest offense is that this delayed the very end of the game. There's a time and a place for everything. If you wanted to do a tribute to the Inside the NBA guys, right, you would either do it in the pregame, in the postgame, or during an intermission. You don't stop the game for this, and you certainly don't do it at the climax of the All-Star game, because in doing this, TNT not only made this broadcast all about themselves from beginning to end, they did it at the expense of the basketball. They basically sent the message to the viewer again and again and again that they didn't care about this game, that they themselves were more important than this game, and that they felt like they could put anything they wanted on screen, whether it was MrBeast or Kevin Hart or one of their own commentators literally saying that the game sucked. TNT treated this game like trash. And that's what viewers saw it as. And not unreasonably. I mean, even in the trophy ceremony, this broadcast was still making it all about themselves.
And we will get to this championship trophy. We'll get to the MVP trophy. But first, could we have a hand for Kevin Hart and his role tonight here in San Francisco?
They actually delayed the trophy ceremony to the MVP so that they could have a mock trophy ceremony in front of the players in which they gave Kevin Hart a tiny trophy as a joke. Like they couldn't cede the spotlight to the players even when it was time to literally put a spotlight on the players. So the game finally ends. And everyone's reaction to it is, wow, that was embarrassing. And sure enough, the 2025 All-Star Game got an almost record low rating. And people came away from this game wondering if the All-Star Game was even salvageable. And yet it was, because only 1 year later, with NBC now airing the All-Star Game, the ratings were great and people enjoyed it. So it's worth asking, what were the big differences between the 2025 All-Star Game and the 2026 All-Star Game? Well, first, in the 2026 edition, they changed the format once again by making it USA versus World. They kept the tournament idea, but they made it so that there were 3 teams in it instead of 4. And they made it so that there were 2 Team USA teams, a young team and an old team, and 1 world team. And this was a crucial change because one of the big problems with the 2025 game was that there was almost nothing intuitive about it. In the 2025 game, there was a learning curve to almost everything because there were these teams named after announcers, and there was a very good chance you didn't know who was on any of these teams. And so you had almost no connection to anything that was happening. And then on top of that, the 4th team was a team of rookies and sophomores who were not all-stars and who a bunch of casual viewers had probably never even heard of. It was all way too convoluted a system for an exhibition game. Whereas in 2026, they made the teams super easy to keep track of. It was an old USA team, a young USA team, and a world team with no rookie-sophomore component. And that was it. And additionally, they made it extra easy to follow by giving the teams distinguishable uniforms. The USA team, called the Stars, had stars on their uniforms, while the USA team, called the Stripes, had stripes on their uniforms. So you always knew which team was which and who was on which team. Whereas in the 2025 game, the team uniforms and the colors they were wearing were completely arbitrary. There were a couple other good changes too. For one thing, in the 2026 game, all the games had a standard 12-minute timer, whereas in 2025, each of the games were played to 40, which was just one more bizarre detail that everyone had to now keep track of. Another important change was that in the 2025 game, the court was hideous. It was really loud and distracting. You didn't know what you were supposed to be looking at, especially when there were already like 7 other new things that you needed to keep track of throughout the game. Now look at the floor in the 2026 game. A huge improvement. They made it really clean, and by doing that, they made it much easier to concentrate on the players themselves, and thus the basketball. So essentially, what the 2026 All-Star Game did was take the tournament concept that the 2025 game had established and improve upon it. And the changes that were made absolutely worked. But here's the thing. The biggest reason why the 2026 All-Star Game succeeded and the 2025 All-Star Game didn't is because the 2026 All-Star Game took out all the extraneous bullshit that had been added to the 2025 All-Star Game. You know what the 2026 All-Star Game didn't do? It didn't stop everything for a random MrBeast segment. It didn't have Kevin Hart doing bad comedy throughout the whole thing. It didn't have a 6-minute musical performance in the middle of it, or incredibly long intros. It didn't have their studio panel barely paying any interest to the game at all. It didn't have one of their panelists say that the game was a 0 out of 10 and repeatedly make the case to the viewers that the game was boring and not worth watching. It didn't have one of their announcers claim that Nikola Jokic, who'd won 3 of the last 4 MVPs, wasn't a top 5 player. It didn't have its teams be named after the game's announcers. It didn't treat the game's announcers as though they were more important than the players, or put them on a dais that made them stand out in front of the players. And it didn't delay the end of the game for 10 minutes to celebrate the announcers in a broadcast in which they'd already celebrated themselves again and again and again. In an alternate universe in which none of this nonsense was part of the 2025 game, people's takeaway from it would have been that the game was fine, because the actual basketball wasn't the problem. The primary reason the 2025 game was a disaster is because TNT and the NBA made it a disaster. They doomed it from the start. They set it up to fail. And for all the good structural changes that were made to this format for the 2026 game, if they hadn't also gotten rid of all the bullshit that was added to the 2025 game, viewers wouldn't have enjoyed it either. And that is what's remarkable about the 2025 NBA All-Star Game, because it is as bad as any major sports broadcast could ever possibly be, and it was completely avoidable. This All-Star Game is a cautionary tale for what can happen when you take your core audience for granted and start to think that you can get by just making your product appeal to somebody else. Because the irony of this game is that the NBA, through all the structural changes that they made, did produce an All-Star game that had a higher quality of basketball than the previous years, but it didn't matter because the league was simultaneously so fixated on making changes to the game that had nothing to do with the basketball that they totally negated it. You get the sense that after the 2024 All-Star Game, the NBA went to TNT and basically said, we're going to change some things, but honestly, we don't know what the hell to do with this game anymore. We have no faith that we can actually make it good, so why don't you guys just go nuts with it? Do whatever you want with it, it doesn't matter. And so it felt like the NBA accidentally essentially sabotaged their own All-Star Game by trying to make it appeal to people who weren't primarily interested in basketball in the first place. And in doing so, they created something that didn't appeal to anybody. And it's a good thing that it didn't appeal to anybody, because if there had been an audience for this, then every NBA All-Star Game would be exactly like this. And thankfully, that's not the case.